Want me to use this, yeah? Do I need to use these two?
Just one of the one with a coloured label, right?
The one with the coloured label, yeah? This one, yeah? The one that's got the rubber band around it. Take it.
Oh, it's working now.
Is it working, yeah?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, no problem. So I'm guessing this is picking up the online streaming. I've always wanted to be a rock star. Sorry. Make sure that doesn't get sent across. So Bismillah, sorry, let's go back to the topic at hand. This is just generally giving the outline. Number 1, introduction to calculation principles. 3, what do we pay zakat on? What assets? Number 4, what are we allowed to minus? Liabilities. Number 5, touch on where you can spend zakat. And finally, there are some questions in here. We normally make our audiences work because we feel as though they actually benefit more that way. But again, we don't know, time pending, how much time we can spend on there. So very, very quickly, what and why? Why zakat? Reality is that zakat in its linguistic term, it means growth, purification. But normally when we say zakat, we're referring to its terminological usage in the Sharia, that it refers to an obligatory payment of 2.5% on qualifying wealth, which we'll discuss what qualifies annually, and it's distributed to the deserving poor. In terms of the importance of zakat, we were taught in kids as maktab that it's the third of the 5 core pillars of Islam by Quranic ranking, and it's next after prayer. I mean, in the Quran, I think 28 times zakat is mentioned directly with salah, and over 30 times it's mentioned, in a general sense, if you want to include. So we cannot underestimate the importance of zakat, to the extent that, the second Khalifa of Islam, Hazrat Siddiq Akbar, Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he waged war against certain rudud al-harb, certain people who were leaving Islam, and also people that were refusing to pay zakat. So it is something that is very important. And lastly, mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who really owns your money anyway. I remember since Hazrat Maulana Zia Sahab sitting in front of us, though, I think the last year Hazrat Maulana Yusuf Matala Sahab rahmatullah alayhi, he was teaching Bukhari Sharif. I had the opportunity to attend quite a lot of durus, and when it came to zakat, he just made a passing comment, as Hazrat normally would do, say 2 lines that would encompass, our presentation for 2 hours. If you just had money sitting there beyond the nisab, every year it's getting less because you're paying zakat. It's sending a message. Allah Pak ne jo mal diya hame, whatever wealth we've been given, the purpose is that's where we're supposed to spend it. Okay, we're supposed to spend it in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And why did I write who really owns your money anyway? Because if you think about it logically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala owns the world, and He created the world. But we walk about it half the time thinking that it's ours. Hamara hai, hamara gar hai, hamara paisa hai, hamari izzat hai. And this is, I suppose, a deeper problem. This is why you spend time with the likes of Hazrat Maulana Zia Sahab, Ustad Ji, Dr. Mahmood Sahab, and all these, mashallah, Maulana Muhammad, you have mashayikh amongst you that will seek out why do we consider wealth to be our own. But I'm not going to touch upon that. The bottom line is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He wanted to, He could have said to us, all Muslims spend 100% wealth in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but He didn't. He only asked us to pay 2.5%, a very small amount of, giving exceptions. And the best thing is, when we're spending that wealth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so Rahim and so Kareem that He gave us ajr on spending that wealth. So you'll be rewarded for your zakat. And finally, if that wasn't enough, at the same time, when you do spend it, you get your ajr, you're helping, inshallah, the Muslim ummah. So 3 very big ni'mats and blessings. What does it mean for you, the benefits of zakat? Again, Alama Kasani, famous jurist of the Hanafi madhab, he actually mentions quite directly that for you, it's almost like a transaction between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That, Ya Allah, you gave me this wealth. Ya Allah, I'm trying to fulfill these obligations, but please, make it a means of placing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala back in the equation. It's not about, ajkal no problem. Sorry. Again, not trying to demean modern culture and scientific advances, hum sab istemal karte hain. But the fact that we can do things faster means, you log on to Ummah Welfare's website, your zakat's done 2.5 seconds. Sochne ka mauka hi nahi milta. We don't even get a chance to think, what am I doing? Why am I doing? That's why it's always nice if you ever have a chance, hatta al-imkan, to go and distribute your zakat with your own hands. When you finally see what it does, wo jo dard paida karti hai, and you finally realize, sorry, ignore the slides, these guys are having a bit of fun, and my absence, theek hai? Theek hai, no problem. Can I push it back, yeah? That's fine, no problem, Jazakallah. So that's obviously for you, signal processing, theek hai? So for the recipient, so that's for you, for the person that actually receives the money. It's a human capital fund allowing the poor out of poverty. And this is again, when we touch upon the nisab, it's based upon, trying to receive the bare minimum. It's trying to stimulate you so that you can at least get by, inshallah. I mean, there was a time, as I mentioned before, and not just once, people normally quote the time of the Sahaba, the time of the Tabi'un, certain times in the Ottoman Empire, certain times of the golden legacy, the Andalus, where you could not find somebody to give zakat to. You could actually, that was that much wealth in the ummah. And I was even reading recently that before the British Raj was aggressively, colonizing or trying to colonize the Indian lands, Lord Macaulay addressed the House of Parliament, and he actually made this comment in his address, I can't remember, somewhere between 1930, to say that I've been to Hind, I've been to India, and I cannot see a thief, I cannot see a beggar. So there was actually that time where even where we come from, our lands were filled with prosperity before certain forces took hand, and to this day we see the effects of them. Lastly, for the economy, so that's for you, that's for the person. What about the system at large? What about the ummah at large? We sit here, we listen to Mr. Rishi Sunak talking about giving cash injections, controlling interest rates, trying to address the problems in the economy. Whether or not they work is a separate discussion, but in itself, zakat is essentially liquidity injections financing the growth of the faith and the faithful. So it does actually serve that purpose. The problem that we may have is that unfortunately perhaps people that are giving zakat are not giving it properly, or they're not giving enough, or they seem to think that zakat is enough. We've kind of lost this voluntary aspect of sadaqah, and it's everywhere in the world. Or the people that shouldn't be taking zakat are taking zakat. And in cheezon ke saath, amongst other things, the effect of our sins, the fact that we don't have ta'alluq with mashayikh, these create this lack of blessings in the ummah, which is why even though we plow millions, unfortunately we cannot get rid of poverty. So again, very briefly, this is again straight from Ayat Karima, Surah Al-Imran, where Allah Pak says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. And those, I'll just read the translation to save time. It's on the screen for people that wish to read it. And those who are miserly with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them from His grace should certainly not think it is good for them, rather it is bad for them. What they are miserly will soon be twisted around their necks on the day of judgment. ठीक है? बल हुवा शरुल लहुम सयुतव्वक़ून मा बख़िलू बिही यौम al-qiyamah. And that is, unfortunately, the punishment that one may receive for neglecting zakat. Again, we've mentioned the Qur'an Pak, quoting the hadith recorded by or reported by Al-Imam Bukhari rahmatullah alayhi, where essentially money that does not have zakat paid on it can take the form of a snake that will encircle one's neck and bite his cheeks and say, Ana maluk ana kanzuk, that I am your wealth, and I am these things that you didn't pay regard to. So with that short introduction, let's run through some of the basics. Again, we're doing this for the second time. I'll try and cover as much as possible, but we want to try and stick, especially with the delays setting up, so on and so forth. Who pays zakat? Number one, you must be Muslim. So non-Muslims do not pay zakat. Number two, adolescent. One needs to be baligh or balighah. And number three, one needs to have a certain level of mental capacity, which sometimes the jurists will write English is the words they'll use is sane. So all these things combined in terms of the individual, and then externally he owns wealth that reaches the threshold, which the ulama refer to as the nisab, which we'll mention in a second. These things will make somebody eligible to pay zakat. Okay. There's a note on the right hand side, zakat is not compulsory on non-baligh children. That's important to remember. For example, if you have a CTF, child trust fund, and your full intention is that I've already given this money to this child, then that child does not necessarily pay zakat on that wealth until such a time where they become an adolescent, they become baligh, and therefore thereafter, which may be slightly when they're older, then it will be eligible to pay zakat on that funds. And just so, I move very briefly, these are according the principles, what you're being told today is according to the Hanafi madhab. There may be differences in other madahib. So for example, Indal Malik, according to the Maliki jurists, the Hanbali jurists, the Shafi'i jurists, adolescence and sanity are not prerequisites to paying zakat. So according to them, they would say you still pay zakat on the child trust fund. Okay, but at the end of the day, the first answer I gave you is what we have spent a good portion of our lives learning, and that's what the majority of people are following. So we're sticking to the Hanafi madhab for the rulings that we're giving throughout the duration of the presentation. Number two, calculating zakat. Okay, zakat is not only paid on wealth that you have saved or kept for a full Islamic year. I'm going to go through some charts which will cement this. But essentially what you're doing, as it says in the second line, is on your zakat anniversary date you are taking a snapshot. Okay, so for example, arbitrary figure, you had 100,000. I'm saying 100,000 because mashallah क्योंकि Salman Heaton छे ना मालदार लोग हम जरा Blackburn Road, we masa we get 20,000 pounds together. क्योंकि Salman, you got more than 20? अच्छा चलो. It's Dr Mahmood Saab's son-in-law. तो Dr Mahmood Saab नहीं है तो he sent him to evaluate. मैं इनको खुश रख रहा हूँ. ठीक थोड़ा बहुत दे दे क्योंकि उस्ताद थोड़ा दे दे. So if you had 100,000 pounds last year and you had 150,000 pounds this year, you would still pay on the 150,000 even though you paid zakat on the 100,000 the year before. Okay, just to illustrate that point. Sorry, I'm finding it hard to as in I know on the day of Qiyamah is that hadith aati hai na ke the people in the lower levels of Jannat, they will look up to the higher level. Is tarah topi gir jayegi. So our Asatisa will be on that level, and you're making me practice that, but my neck's getting sore. So let me know if they can still hear me. ठीक है? अदर चेयर नहीं, वो आपसे ऊपर नहीं हम बैठेंगे. I'm just saying, let me know if they can't hear me. ठीक है?
माइक आपसे ज़्यादा ऊपर है, ये भी आपको.
अदर ये वो जरा तार लगी है, इसको मैं नीचे भी नहीं कर सकता. Just let me know if they can't hear me. No, Ustad ji, Ustad ji, no. I'm not sitting on top, but just if they can still hear, that's the problem. They can hear. Next point, zakat is an individual obligation. Okay, it's an individual obligation for every single person. So that means, for example, when Maulana Salman, I'll use in a second, says to his wife ke उसमें में एक सेकंड यार आपका हुक्म है अल्लाह तो ठीक है बशरफ. तो अब ये बहुत नीचे आया, अब मैं जन्नत में ऊपर पहुंच गया हूँ. अब आई एम लुकिंग डाउन. चलो, that's fine, no worries, it's fine. I just leave it because if you just ill, then I'll just Ustad ne bol diya, baat khatam. Zakat is an individual obligation. So for those people that they pay their wife's zakat, that's fine, unki karam nawazi hai, or the wife pays the husband zakat, kyunki Musliman kabhi zarurat bhi padti hai na, you know, that's fine. But reality is that it's an individual responsibility. Aapki zimmedari hai. You should go out your way to pay your own zakat, to work it out. And not simply rely on someone else, albeit if they do it with your consent, then inshallah aapki zakat will definitely be done. So next, if for example the father or mother wishes to give, I think I've covered that, that's fine. And on the right hand side, yeah, that's fine, we're going to touch on that as well. Moving on swiftly, so I mentioned a few moments ago the nisab. Okay, this essentially refers to a threshold, a minimum amount for which it is necessary, beyond which for one to pay zakat. So the definition is written there at the top. It is the minimum amount required upon which it is compulsory to give zakat. There's a big history behind nisab. It comes from it comes from the prophetic era. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam defined it as 200 dirhams or 20 sort of gold coins. But essentially what it means to you and me is that it's either 612.36 grams of silver, which is what we have here on the left. And as of the 22nd, was that just the calculations from the other day? When we were around there. So I looked at it on the 22nd. You can check it again today. It probably won't have changed much, but just for argument's sake, a few days ago it was £375 and 5 pence. On the right hand side, you will see 87.48 grams, including, reaching 4,120.26. Now there is quite a big difference, okay? Again, the difference is now it's essentially 1 in 100, but at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the difference wasn't as much. Why is it any different? There are certain ulama that give fatwas on using this figure, the larger figure, the gold figure for nisab, but we just obviously following the practice of our elders and other Mufti Ikram. Right now, currently, the majority is this is the level. There's various arguments of what the advantage of setting the nisab higher, but for make it simple today, we stick with 37505, and that's essentially what I will be referring back to when we go through the calculations. Next, when to use. If somebody, and everyone, when I say everyone, 90% of people will fall under this category. If you have a mixture of wealth, i.e. you maybe have some gold, you have some silver, you have cash, you have some shares, which is 99.9% of people, then you will be using the silver zakat amount. The only time you would probably use the gold zakat is when all you own is gold. So for example, if you are a wife and you have nothing to your name, apart from your gold that's yours, and you maybe have you've got gold that you've stored in us, then you would use the gold. But as I said, a lot of people probably have a mixture of money and gold, so we just stick with the one on the left. How do I know my nisab? I think I have put some links here at the bottom. You can either work it out. The intelligent people will look up various websites where you can track the value, the market value, which fluctuates of grams of silver. But we've put some couple of links here. So this is Darul Fiqh, which is run by Mufti Faraz Adam. He's a good friend of mine, mashallah, senior, very, very well knowledgeable in zakat matters. And this is just a charity, wellwishers.org. So this is somewhere where you can just log on very quickly to check what the zakat amount will be. Okay, let's go back on to zakat anniversary date. Once the nisab has been reached, it will remain the same date forever unless a person has nothing left. In other words, if a person goes bankrupt. I'll explain that again. A new date will be established once again when a person has nisab again. Zakat is calculated according to the lunar calendar. This is the lunar calendar, Yani, Muharram, Safar, etc. Ramadan, these is what we refer to as the Islamic, not necessarily January, February. When we come to paying zakat on businesses, there is a way of using your Gregorian January, February, March calendar, but I'll touch on that later on. Coming back to what the point is, that most people, in fact everyone where possible, should be paying zakat according to the lunar calendar. Thus the date and the month should be noted, and the zakat should be calculated on the same date every year. Again, Maulana Sajjad Sahab, when we were going through this on Friday, he reminded me that to remind the audience that the date which you or an individual becomes baligh, so you may have the average, just for argument's sake, the average 14-year-old, and there's not many 14-year-olds sitting here today, although Salman would like to think he probably is still that age. Mashallah, these 14-year-olds nowadays, some of them are like Maulana Salman. They know, they've got good taluk with the ulama, they've been to Darul Masail jante hain, yeah? But reality is that when we don't have that environment, we're actually not, we don't give the date as much importance. Maulana Sajjad Sahab, he did mention, we need to have that ta'alluq with our children so that they come to us and say, Dad, I've had a wet dream. I'm sure the mothers and the daughters hopefully already have that, because if they happen to have £400 in their possession, anything over 375, that is the day that their clock starts ticking for their annual zakat cycle. That's how it should happen. Unfortunately, because of my mistakes of not being able to educate the community, the zakat date is often chosen. So people will just choose a date in Ramadan, which is fine, the ulama allow it, but in the meantime stick to that date. But please remember this principle. I have an anecdote again of Imam Muhammad rahmatullah alayhi, the day he became baligh, and Imam Abu Hanifa, but inshallah we'll maybe share that next time. So lunar calendar, know your date, okay, know your date. Zakat should be given ASAP. And by the way, if you don't know your date, if you were like me, because I realized, again, I wasn't the average clever 14-year-old, I maybe realized when I was about 18, 19, so then I actually went retrospectively using these Hijri calendars where you can put in dates just to figure out if I can get down to that date, because I didn't know what date. But that might be someone if they're close, but if it's too difficult to do that, then just go with your existing date. Finally, zakat should be given ASAP. You need to leave it for the following year to do, to pay your zakat. It's mentioned here that it's sinful, but what I would say is that whatever your date is, at least mark your zakat and put it at the side. Okay, say this is my zakat, and you can give it out at various points in the year. One masala. The other thing is, even if your year hasn't started, you can also give zakat in advance. Okay, generally people have a rough idea because they're paying zakat, just for argument's sake, you're paying £2,000 zakat. You can't pay at any point during the year and then just calculate that when it comes to your date actually. So this is again just some practice about, don't be confused too much. So what we have on the left column of this graph is your net zakatable assets. So this is what the value of everything you own, the value of everything you own. In the morning is a timeline, on the axis at the bottom is a timeline starting at Jamadiul Ula, Jamadiul Thaniya, Rajab, Sha'ban, and it runs all the way to Jamadiul Ula of the following year. So just to put exactly what I mentioned to you in a practical example, Mr. X, okay, Maulana Salman Sahab, he starts the year at the end of Jamadiul Ula and Jamadiul Thaniya, okay? This is the year of his start. He will then wait until one more year to look at his bank accounts, okay? To look at his bank accounts, and on that day, he will take a snapshot, and it just so happened, according to this graph, okay, his year started then, but then he had essentially £400, and therefore, or the value of what he owned was £400, and his zakat will be 2.5%. Moving on to the next example, again we have the same person. His year started, or his date is again the end of Jamadiul Ula, the start of Jamadiul Thaniya. He's starting here, at which point he had £650. 1 year on in his zakat anniversary date, he realizes that he's only with £100. He's below the nisab. He is below the nisab. And what he will do in this situation is that he will not pay zakat, okay? He will not pay zakat, and he will then, the next time he reaches nisab, he will mark that date and then go 1 year thereafter. Finally, this example here of somebody you may mention, the only time that your date will change categorically is if during the year you went absolutely bankrupt, you went into the minus. So this person, again, there should be a line here, just say he started at the beginning of Jamadiul Thaniya, okay? That was what he had, £650. By the time, before he even got to the same time, okay? He realized that in Muharram he went bankrupt, yani he went minus. So if you lose everything, okay, then that year you don't pay zakat, and what you will do is the next time you hit the nisab level, which is the black line, you will then mark that date, and again you won't pay zakat on that 375. You will then count another year from that point onwards. That is if you are bankrupt during the year. Again, this is a good example. I think we'll run through this because it just cements that knowledge. Is there any other, what we'll do is start, see this person, just say for argument's sake, the nisab is £300. Take it. Your name? Imran, you look intelligent. Take it. So Imran here is going to help us. Which point does this guy's year start clicking? So these are the months on the left. 30th of Sha'ban, 30th of Ramadan, 50th Ramadan, 5th of Shawwal, and this is what he owns. Okay, that's it, mashallah. Professor Imran has told us that on the 15th of Ramadan, when he hits £300, the clock starts ticking. When does he pay zakat? The 15th of Ramadan, the year after, correct. So that's the second last line, at which point his balance is £600, okay? So £600 is what he owns on the 15th of Ramadan, 1439, and he will then pay 2.5% on £600. I won't embarrass myself and yourself by asking you what that is. Now, what we'll do is, again, I'm just trying to save time because I need to pass over to Maulana Sajjad Sahab. The zakat calculation, this is your take-home message. Essentially, what you need to know about zakat, everything's on the slide. I know it's very simple. Number one is very easy because we're going to discuss this for the next 15-20 minutes. What do you own? What are your zakatable assets? Which things do you have in life where you should be paying zakat on? Number one. Number two, then you look at the things that you're allowed to minus, your deductible liabilities, be that any bills, loans, etc. We'll talk about that too. And then finally, you pay 2.5% of your zakat in total. Okay? So we're moving through the first point here. This is zakatable assets. Zakatable assets, what must I give zakat on? Number one, the obvious one that we all know, cash and money owed to you. Cash, whether cash lies in the bank. I think there's a slide on cash. No, there isn't. So I'll just cover it here. Cash, whether it's in your pocket, whether it's in your Monzo card, whether it's sitting in your bank accounts, that all carries value. You need to add that to your column of one of things that I should pay zakat on. Money owed to you, okay? So if you've loaned money out to somebody and you have hope of it coming back, then you will also add that to your tally of giving zakat. Similarly, qarzi hasana, etc. Gold and silver, there's a slide on this coming, but in essence, in the Hanafi madhab, any type of gold that you own, any type of gold and silver that you own, you will be paying zakat on it. Whether you've bought it for your child and you haven't given it to them, whether you're wearing it, whether you use it or don't use it. Again, other madahib differ on this, but that's what the ruling is in the Hanafi madhab. Business assets, okay, and again, we'll cover this towards the end of the presentation, that anything purchased with the intention of selling. So if you're running a business, and we will cover this in more detail, you're running a mobile phone shop, you have bought mobile phones to sell them on, therefore you will undertake a valuation and you will add that to things that you should be paying zakat on. Shares and pensions, this is what Dr. Mahmood Saab asked me to go into some details. So I think I'm covering pensions. Mali Sajjad's probably going to cover shares before me. They are also qualifiable for zakat under certain conditions, and we'll cover that. And lastly, if you have any livestock, koi bakriyan rakhi hui hain, koi bhainse hain, then you may have to pay zakat. But we won't dwell on this too much because last time I checked, I think there's some regulations even in Heaton of keeping animals in your back garden. Anyway, let's move on to this next slide. General rule, there is no zakat on any assets owned except for these mentioned. So what I just discussed with you is this, okay? The reason why I'm mentioning this is that's what you do give zakat on the right hand side. On the left hand side, what do you not to give zakat on, okay? Number one, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. Perhaps I missed this at the beginning, that you don't even pay zakat on your hawa'ij asliya, the things that you need to survive. So for example, a house that you've purchased to live in, there's no zakat on the value of that. A land that you've purchased to build a house on, unless it's for business purposes, which we'll discuss later. Whatever your house owns, the doors, that expensive ornament that you brought from, I don't know, your holiday in Turkey. Your cars, whether you have 1, 2 or 3, they don't qualify to give zakat unless you've bought them with the intention of selling them. But again, personal items, you don't. Your clothing, your phones, your computers, okay? These are things that you do not factor in, whether it's them directly or the value into zakat. And finally, any goods purchased for personal use or for renting purposes. The reason why this isn't gold, because we get lots of questions that we own X amount of properties. The reality is that unless you are, if you bought them just with the intention that is an investment, but it's a long-term investment, we'll sell them one day, dekhi jaoge, if you need the money, if you don't need the money, then the only thing that you pay zakat on is the rental income, which comes under the first category of cash. But the actual value of the homes you will not pay zakat on. unless of course you're a property developer and you've bought it and your only intention is I'm going to make quick adjustments and I'm going to sell it on. Then if that's the case, they would no longer qualify under that category. So zakat finally is only compulsory on the house, lands, vehicles, clothing and any goods purchased for the purpose of resale, which is what I've just mentioned to you. Okay, so going on is another example. I think we'll leave this one out because I want to try and pass over to Mawlana Sajjad Sahab very quickly. What must I give zakat on? Gold and silver. Again, just going back on this, I briefly touched on it before. It is necessary to give zakat on any gold and silver, whichever form the gold and silver may be in. I've said that, and whether it's for personal use or otherwise, done. If any personal items are made from a mixture of metals, then zakat will be necessary only on the gold or silver. So for example, if you have 9 karat gold versus 24 karat gold, there's a big difference in the amount of gold that's been used in that item. So if you have a piece of jewelry, you know how much, when you weigh it, you will have to figure out what part is gold before you, or how much of it is gold before you will take the value of that, as opposed to taking the total value of the item itself. The zakat will be calculated on the resale value. This can be obtained either from local jewelers or scrap gold price. Most of traditionally what the women folk or men folk would do is they just phone the jewelers. That's what my mum used to do. But nowadays, with the advent of with the usage of internet, you can literally just Google scrap gold value, okay, and take the scrap gold value, which is the price that you will get for gold should you happen to sell it on the day.
May I ask a question then?
Gigi?
May I ask a question?
Yes, Gigi.
For example, if somebody had gold...
So I'd normally turn and I'm just worried that... Hi.
No, sir. If somebody had gold and silver currently, and they read this, and they were to sort of sell the gold because to avoid zakat and buy the precious metals, is that allowed?
Is it halal to sell the gold and buy precious metals?
To avoid paying zakat. Is that...
I mean, if the intention is to avoid paying zakat, देखो मुसलमान की जो फितरत है, the way Muslims are made, you know, if it's to get, we don't do it to get out of zakat. If his intention is to get out of zakat, that might be a bit suspect. But if he's just doing it to have an alternative investment, if he's saying, you know what, rather than buy gold bullions, you know, Ismail Bhai, I'm going to invest my money in something else. But I know that one of the benefit is that I'm not going to have to pay zakat. But TK is doing it as a tijarat. It's up to him where he wants to invest his money. But to avoid the shariat, okay, deliberately to avoid zakat, that's not right. For example, okay, you and me are husband and wife. आजकल सब कुछ चलता है ना. So you say to me that, oh, you know what, my zakat date's coming in. What we'll do is the day before my zakat, I'm going to gift you everything I own, and then 2 days later you gift me it back. I mean, reality is, in the eyes of the Shariat, the Qazi Sahab will say to you, there's no zakat on you, but between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll be answerable. Between you and Allah, you'll be answerable if that's what your intention is. It's a very good question. Hazrat, aapka naam? Ismi ka naam? Ahmed. Chalo, mashallah. Hazrat, you can ask questions anytime you want if they're that good. I hope I can answer them. Next, going on to zakat will be calculated. I mentioned the scrap gold price, covered that. There is no zakat in gold and silver which is stuck onto the body and cannot be removed. So, yep, don't phone me and say, you know, I've got this gold tooth, you know, just as a little joke. So, you know what, as dentists would do, purani zamane mein, in fact, we still do it, because they used to use a lot of gold in the teeth. So every time hum dant nikalte the, we'd take the gold crown off and put it in a pot, okay? Because what would happen is that gold still worth something. Then the guy would come around and he'd pay us for it. So, you know, after 6 months of pulling teeth out, you know, you could earn a decent £250 on the side. So, listen, don't ask me the fatwa on doing that. That was my days of jahiliyat before I met Mawlana Zia Sahab. Ye purani baat hai yaar, ab thoda maafi mangde, you know. But you'll be surprised what gold always has value. But for you, you don't need to go in to say to the jewelers and say, can you weigh my tooth? Alhamdulillah, it's stuck to your body. You don't need to pay for it. Next, but if it's removable like a gold ring, piece of jewelry, etc., then you would. Again, just a small example, okay, of giving zakat calculation. on zakat, just to prove the point, and I won't go through the full. 1 gram of 24 karat gold is 10. So again, if it was 24 karat, you need to go according to that. If it was less, 9 karat, then you would obviously take less of a value. Business assets, okay, this is quite important about if you have a business. I'm just going to pass over after this. Yeah, liable, that's fine. I think you were going to do the shares, weren't you? Inshallah. What must I give zakat on business assets? So you run a business. Now, we're not talking about personal zakat. I think that's quite clear, okay? A business asset is anything purchased with the intention to resell, okay? Anything that you have purchased in the business with the intention to resell, you need to get it valued. We can talk about that, and you will be adding that to your number 1 point about a zakatable asset, okay? It is necessary in a business to give zakat to number 1, again, cash, as you would do, either whether it's in your hand, whether it's in your bank accounts, receivables. So for example, if you have issued invoices for the next month, you know how much you've issued, you're expecting that money, you will be paying zakat on that amount. Stock, finished or not, inventory and raw materials, you will also be paying on that stock. So on that stock, for example, you're on a fish and chip shop, okay? You make your chips out of potatoes. You will have to go and see how many bags of potatoes I've got and go according to the market value, how many frozen fish I have. Just a very basic example, but you could obviously extrapolate that into...
I think a good point to mention here is the title may be misleading. Someone might think you only pay zakat if you've got a business. But the concept is anything brought with the intention to resell, then it's zakatable. So nowadays, especially if you're selling stuff at home through eBay or through Instagram or anything like that, that's classed as a tradable asset, so you need to pay zakat on it. Doesn't matter whether you've got an accountant or you've got actual business or not, it's classed as a tradable asset, so you have to pay zakat on it. So many of our women folk, if there's khawateen downstairs, if they're selling stuff on Instagram or selling stuff on eBay, anything you have at home which you brought with the intention to resell straight away, then there's zakat due on it, regardless of what. So don't be misled by the title there. It's only if I've got an actual business. Anything with the intention of resell, it is zakatable.
I'm just going to repeat your point for the online. Maulana Sajjad Sahab, mashallah, very good, valid point that a business is not just somebody who's, you'll be Ismail Bhai, registered at company's house, or has got an LLP, or has got an office on, Charlie New Road. A business can be anything. Even if you're buying and selling in the house, you're on an eBay business, it depends on your intention. Jazakallah Sahab. So just to go back to that point about inventory and raw materials, some people might find it difficult. How do you qualify raw materials? The raw materials should be calculated on their current market price, the finished goods on their retail sale price, and the unfinished goods on their expected price at the zakat date. Finally, there is no zakat, again, similarly to what we did on these things. So, and when it comes to business, if you have purchased land, okay, when your intention is I'm going to build a factory on it, there's no zakat on that land. The building itself, there's no zakat. It doesn't matter how much it costs. Machinery that you have, because they're just actively, again, Allah Pak's rahmat and mercy, that these are not the end products, they're contributing towards making the end products, okay? Equipment, fixtures and fittings, transport vehicles, and again, when it comes to nowadays businesses, the value is no longer just on bricks and mortar. You will have value in more than one aspect. Goodwill is just how much that business is worth in terms of what it's going to bring in, and other intangible assets. So for example, property rights, etc., intellectual rights, outstanding services, service renewables, receivables. So these things do not have a zakat. Now what we're going to do is we're moving on to what Dr. Mahmood Saab had first said in the slide where, in the poster. We're going to be discussing things like shares, pensions, etc. So I'm going to give the mic to Hazrat Maulana Sajjad Saab, who's going to run through this so I can get a break. Again, any questions, feel free to ask through the presentation. So, it's up to you. I'm just trying to save time because we started late. But if you feel as though it's okay.
You've got a clicker. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli wa nusallimu ala rasulihil kareem. So in terms of modern day financing, there are a lot of stuff which questions arise that do I need to give zakat on this or not? Because they are not traditionally mentioned in books explicitly, then the question arises, for example, stocks, equity investments, unit trusts, bonds, sukuk, etc. That do I need to give zakat on this? Now, first of all, if you think and ponder on it, it's the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His rahmah that He didn't make zakat liable on everything we own. For example, if we had to pay zakat on the house that we own, the cars, the clothes, everything, then it'd be great haraj, it would have been a great difficulty upon us. But it was the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that zakat is only due on certain things. Now, as Mufti Sahib mentioned earlier, that business assets or tradable assets are due for zakat. So you have to give zakat on tradable assets. So it's similar concept on shares as well and other financial stuff. So if you buy anything with the intention of selling it straight, with the intention of selling, so your concrete intention when you brought it was, I'm just going to sell it, that's a tradable asset that you need to give zakat on the full value. You need to give zakat on the full value regardless of what it is. Other than that, if it's not, then you look whether it falls underneath a zakatable asset. So what Mufti Sahib mentioned earlier, gold, silver, cash, etc. So shares, first of all, before even going into whether there's zakat on shares, the note in red is very important that you need to check that the company you're buying shares into, is it permissible for me to buy them shares or not? So is it halal for me to buy them shares? There are many companies, for example, you want to buy shares into a company or into a brewery, then it's impermissible. Or if you want to buy shares into a company which manufactures pork, then it's impermissible. So you need to check whether it's halal first of all, whether them shares are halal first. Because if you buy shares into a company which is impermissible, then you need to give all of that in sadaqah. Because haram money is not liable for zakat. Because zakat is only on halal income and 2.5% of it. If you have haram income, if you have interest, then all of 100%, all of that needs to be given into charity without hoping of any reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then in terms of shares, you can split them into two. So if you brought it with the intention to resell, then that's classed as a tradable asset. You need to give zakat on the entire holding of the current market value. So if your shares are valued on your zakat date at £20,000, you need to give 2.5% of that, 20,000. However, if you brought the shares as buy and hold strategy, so in terms of this intention, only if your intention is concrete, I am buying it to sell, that's it. If it's anything else, you're in doubt, I'm buying it, I'll see if I want to sell it in the future. If there's decent money in the future, I'll sell it. Or you're buying it just for investment, then it falls into this category. So buy and hold trading strategy or savings and store of wealth. In that case, then what you need to do is, ideally, you need to look into the company that you have brought shares into. So you need to look into their balance sheets and you need to find the amount of zakatable assets they have. For example, if the company is worth £100 million and there's zakatable assets, which Mufti Sahib covered earlier, gold, silver, cash, etc., their zakatable assets are 20 million. So that's a fifth of their overall value. And then your shares within that company are 20,000. So you need to pay zakat on the fifth of that, which would be 4,000. And then you work out 2.5% of 4,000. So that is your zakat. So you'll only pay zakat on the zakatable assets of that company if you brought the shares for buy and hold or you just as a means of investment. Now, this is the ideal way of doing it. So you get onto the balance sheets of the company, which if it's a public company, then it's available. Obviously, if it's a private company, then it becomes a bit more difficult. The other option is then you assume that the zakatable assets are 25%. Now, obviously, why are you just assuming 25%? But in reality, what it is Mufti Faraz Sahib, in 2018, once he was working for NZF, him and his colleagues, they looked at the FTSE 100. So the 100 company, the FTSE 100, and they found that just over 60 companies were halal in terms of you could buy shares into them. And when they looked at the zakatable assets of them over 60 companies, it was no more than 25%. So then you can take this value. And it may mean you're paying slight extra zakat, but it's better to pay extra than to pay less and be held accountable on the Day of Judgment. As we see in the warning that Mufti Sahib mentioned earlier. So if it's too difficult, you can't get the balance sheets, you don't understand it, etc., then you can just take a proxy of 25%. So if the company is valued 100%, 100 million, and so 25% of that will be zakatable assets. So if you've got 20,000 shares in that company, 25% is £5,000. You need to pay 2.5% of £5,000, £125 zakat. Does that make sense? So moving forward, there's just this short calculation. Again, we'll skip time just in case. But I'm sure once I've been explaining it, it would have become clear. Now, what must I give zakat on? Property and other fixed assets. This has been, again, it's just reiteration. So intention when buying, what we were discussing. If your concrete intention when buying is to sell, it's a zakatable asset. Anything else, as our Ustad you say, if you're mudhabdhabina bayna dhalik, you're 50-50, or your intention to buy is to reside in it or to rent it out, or you're just uncertain. You know, if there's decent money in it, I'll sell it. If not, I'm not going to sell it. Then there's no zakat on the actual product, on the actual asset. Yes, if it's from the zakatable assets, then you got to pay zakat on it. If it's gold, then you have to pay zakat on it, etc. So it's necessary to give zakat on the entire resale value if it was purchased with express intention to resell. So this is the same with properties. If you brought a property and you buy it with the intention of putting it on rent, you don't give zakat on the value of the property. Yes, the rental income that you get, if you still have that on your zakat date, then that will be liable for zakat. So there is no zakat on it if purchased to reside in or for any personal use or to invest in while retaining ownership, renting out, etc. Similarly, no zakat on an asset purchased with no clear intention. You just don't know what you're going to do with it. Yeah, you might sell it, you might keep it, etc. So unless there's a concrete intention to resell, it's zakatable. If not, it's not. Pensions.
One question. Let's say you bought a house and you're planning to live in it, but it needs work, a lot of work.
Yeah.
You pay zakat on that.
No, because your intention was to reside. So unless your concrete intention to reside.
Stay there.
No, why must it?
I'm going to go back on after. Answer that question.
Yeah, so unless your concrete intention is to sell, I've said that you're a property developer, you buy houses, develop and you sell them, regardless of when it gets sold. If it gets sold in a month's time or 2 years' time, it'll be a zakatable asset. So it's your intention at the time of purchase. Now, if at the time of purchase you buy it and you say, I'm going to rent it out, in a year's time you change your intention. Do you know what? The property market is quite good, I'm going to sell it. It still won't be zakatable because your intention at the time of purchase was to rent out. So if your intention changes to selling it, it still won't be zakatable. It's only zakatable when your intention at the time of buying was to resell.
I'm just going to interject for 5 minutes before giving it back to Mona Sajjad Sahab, because Dr. Mahmood Sahab was saying to me that there's lots of questions about pensions. So just give me 5 minutes on this. Pensions, it sounds really confusing. Okay, and I remember being confused myself until many years ago. But I'm going to, hopefully, Allah Pak's, with Ustad's tawajjuh, Allah Pak's help, I'm going to try and make it very, very simple for you. Number one, you have a pension, which is money that you hope to receive in your retirement phase. We're not going to get into should you have pensions, should you not have pensions. The ulama have given jawaz that if it is a halal investment, as Maulana Sajjad mentions, then it's okay. First thing you need to do is figure out what type of pension you have. And majority of people nowadays, the vast majority fall into the second category, which is known as defined contribution. But just to get the first one quickly out of the way, that if you have a defined benefit scheme, how will you know that? You will ask your pension provider. They will send you a fact sheet. If you are a defined benefit scheme, which normally is, for example, a fixed salary scheme where you retire and you receive a certain portion based upon your earnings, okay, then you do not give zakat, because the ulama or the Mufti Akram, and again, there may be difference on this, but the fatwa that we use have been printed, they say that this is considered like a gift from the employer with combination of your contributions, etc. Therefore, in a defined benefit pension, there is no zakat, and that includes final salary schemes, career averages. What does that really mean? In the olden times where, labor was ploughing money everywhere without any regard for the economy, you may have had very generous public sector pensions where they were, taking the bulk of the investment risk, etc., or they were just borrowing out of the public purse. So unless you really work for the NHS, etc., and these public sector companies, you're not likely to be in the first category. So there's no zakat if you are done. The second one is what we all need to concentrate on, which is why I've rejigged this slide from last year. Again, I know there's lots of text. You probably will be in a defined contribution scheme, which includes SIPs, AVCs, personal stakeholders, nowadays private pension schemes, okay? So what do we do for these? In these category, you will be paying zakat, okay? Zakat must be paid in money purchase personal pension schemes where the pension assets are invested on behalf of the pension holder, who has a choice over how to invest the money, and a specific amount of wealth is attributed to the pension holder. However, zakat is only on the zakatable assets. Very similar to what Sajjad Sahib mentioned, there's a general principle that in your pension scheme, which is my next slide, you're going to have to figure out how much of the pension pot has actually got investments or items that are either cash, that are equity, that are invested in property. Now, I'm going to give you two methods. One is the long and hard and the proper way if you want to work it out to the penny. But again, Allah give Jazai Khair to Mufti Faraz Sahib and the team, where they have actually come up with certain percentages that you can use instead on the bottom right of this slide, where if you don't want to go through the long way. So just to make it very, very simple, what do you do step by step? Number one, make sure your pension is halal in the first place and request the fact sheet or the portfolio. Again, financial literacy nowadays it's become a bit of a skill. Unless you're an expert like Ismail Bhai Amla, you may find it difficult to read balance sheets, to read accounts, etc. You can maybe work through it with your accountant, but I'm not here to train you on how to read balance sheets because I'm not an expert myself. You know, like I mentioned earlier, Toribot, you know, we made a few pounds on Blackburn Road, and that's enough for us right now. Number two, once you get the documents through, if you can, determine the total percentage of zakatable assets in the pension fund. So this is the difference between this first category and the second category. So what you will do is the value of your pension at that time is £10,000, okay? You can request that from your pension provider. You will look at how much equity, so these are again what Mona Sajjad Sahib, things like shares. So your pension, how much of your pension money is being invested in equities. So out of your pension, out of that 10,000, 70% is being invested in shares, halal companies. Just to make your life easy, you can just take the 25% proxy, that is the 25%, and reduce that to 17.5, that those investments have invested in things you would normally pay zakat on, done. Next part, they tell you that out of the money in your pension, 5% is actually money sitting in a bank account somewhere. So again, as you know, cash, we don't apply any proxies. We take the full value, 5%. Then they tell you that 15% of the 10 grand that you've been sitting has been invested in properties. They've been invested in properties, again, long-term investments. Maybe you own 0.0000% of, some building in, Kuala Lumpur. Regardless, because your intention or the intention is not immediate resale, it's just a long-term investment, you will not pay zakat. Very similar to if you bought properties and you had no intention to sell immediately. And then you may have other things, for example, your pension pot may have reserves, gold reserves, etc. So, and that's the case, just take the top end figure, include all of it. So out of this £10,000, and this is now coming on to step 3, applying the percentage to your total value, you know that 10,000, only 32.5%, adding up all these, is spent on things that you would normally pay zakat on. So you then calculate out of that 10,000 what is around about 1/3. It is 3,250. So that is your zakatable assets value. And finally, you work out the zakat payment, which is 2.5% of that. And that is what you pay. Okay? Very simple. That's the long way of doing it. Okay? If you're struggling with financial literacy, Ismail Bhai doesn't have time for you. I don't answer your phone. Molly Salman's done a bunk. So what you can do is just use these proxies. So very simple. This is the easy way out. On the fact sheet, you ask your Sharia private, what are you? What is my pension money being invested in? And they'll say, we are a Sharia compliant fund. 26%. Done. You take the value of your pension and use 26%. Why do we say 26%? There's reasons for this. Again, Mufti Faraz Sahab and his team, they looked at 100 of the top pension providers, okay? They looked at them and they scrutinized them into 5 different categories, which you're seeing now. And then they looked at what essentially normally is the zakatable assets in these type of investments. If it's a direct property fund, again, direct property fund, generally speaking, 15%. If it's an equity fund, close to what Mona Sajjad has mentioned before, 27%. A mixed asset fund, 50%. And finally, if they tell you that it's bonds, fixed interest or fixed income fund, then you would take 100% of the value. Note, the last 2 categories, 50%, 100%, are generally not halal, okay? Again, you can speak to a scholar if you fall in them categories to figure out what's the best way to change over to something that's at least Sharia compliant. So I'm going to throw the mic back to Maulana Sajjad Sahab. Hopefully that clarifies pensions, and inshallah he's going to finish the presentation and we can take any questions either before or after Maghrib. Hazrat Maulana, Jazakallah.
Assalamu alaikum. So we're still discussing zakatable assets. So i.e. what do I give zakat on? So initially Mufti Sahib mentioned that gold zakat and cash, there's such things that you have to give zakat on the full value. Then we mentioned business assets. So anything with the intention of resell, within that is then your shares, your equities, etc. Then we discuss pensions. So you have to give zakat on your pensions depending on what type of pension it is, etc. The next thing you have to give zakat on. So remember that earlier there was that slide with the 3 circles. We're still discussing the first one, zakatable assets. So we're still working out what the things I need to give zakat on, what is the total value of that. So the next thing you have to give zakat on is money owed to you. So it's necessary to give zakat only on strong debts. Now within the fiqh text, there's differentiation of debts as strong, medium and weak. But generally any personal loans you give where there is hope that the money owed will be paid back, even within a business. So even if you've got a business and you owed you borrowed somebody money within your business, then you have to include that within your zakatable assets. So if I've borrowed somebody £50,000 and I know he's going to pay it back to me, then I got to give zakat on that £50,000. Now you have 2 choices. Either you bring that into your calculation on a yearly basis and give zakat on it every year, or once you receive the money back from him, then you pay zakat for all the previous years. So if he pays it back to you after 5 years, and for the previous 5 years you give zakat on it. So you have both choices. Either you can give it as you go along, or you can just you pay the zakat once you've received the money. So the obligation to pay zakat is only upon retrieving the debts. That's the obligation. What I've mentioned to you is the choice. You can still pay for it every year, but the obligation is once it arrives, then you have to pay for it. There is no zakat on any other loan or debt. For example, there's no zakat on dowry owed to wife or inherit or outstanding wages. For example, in terms of this, any intangible thing that you are getting paid for, there's no zakat on it. So for example, your wages, that's in lieu of a service that you are providing for your work. So that's an intangible thing. It's not something you can touch. So then you don't need to pay zakat on it. For example, you get paid on the 28th every month. Now your zakat date has arrived, but this month your company has said that unfortunately this is your pay slip, but we're going to pay you 2 days late. We're going to pay you 2 days late, and your zakat date has arrived. So you're expecting that money, but because it was in lieu of something intangible, you don't pay zakat on it. You don't pay zakat on it. So then if you think about it, all these things are intangible things. Dowry owed to a wife. Yes, so obviously in terms of, there's a whole discussion, you won't go to it, but it's inheritance shares. So that's an intangible. Outstanding wage. So inheritance shares, once you've got it, and then your zakat, so once you get your inheritance and now it's in your possession, and now your zakat date comes, then obviously it's in your possession, you bring it. But if someone says, I'm expecting this much, so I've not got it yet, but I'm expecting £10,000 in inheritance, you don't pay zakat on it. Loans advanced without any hope of repayment. So if you've given loan to someone, it's been 10 years, and you think, I'm never going to get this money back, you don't need to pay zakat on it. It's lost money, basically. And outstanding invoices for the sale of personal items, you don't need to give zakat on that as well. So that's zakatable assets finished. So that's the first step that we need to do. Everything you need to give zakat on, you need to work out its total value. Then the next thing is, from this total value, you can minus and you can deduct certain things. So what can you deduct from your zakatable assets? Number 1, incurred debts payable in full within the 12 months. So let's say you've been levied with an invoice for something, for a bill or something, and now you need to pay for it within 12 months, and your zakat date has arrived, you can minus that from your zakatable assets. Because in essence, that money is now in debt. You need to pay that to somebody else. So any expenses to be settled in full within 12 lunar months can be deducted from one's zakat calculation. Now, why if you're in a debt, or why if you're paying back something over 12 months and it's agreed that you're going to pay a monthly amount, for example, a mortgage, then you can only subtract 1 year's worth of payments. And it's important to remember that when it comes to mortgage, you can only subtract the capital amount. Because as we mentioned earlier, interest is haram. Hence, the whole interest needs to be given in charity without any hope of reward. So if you took the value of your house was 100,000, so up to 100,000 pounds that you are paying back, you can deduct that from your zakatable assets. So if you're paying 5,000 pounds a month mortgage, then in a year's worth you're paying 6,000 pounds. So if your zakatable assets added up to 20,000, you minus 6,000, that's 14,000. Then you check, is that above the nisab? Yes or no? Yes, it is. So I need to pay zakat on that 14,000. So we're going to go again. Okay. So if the debt is scheduled to be repaid over a number of years, on the zakat anniversary, one may deduct 1 year's worth of installments. Similarly with student finance. So student finance, you're paying on a monthly. Now remember, student finance, you can only deduct it once you start paying back the money. So if a student's still in university, the debt is not on his head yet. He doesn't need to pay it back, so he can't deduct it as a liability. He can't deduct it as a liability. And arrears, all arrears and overdue payments can be deducted. For example, now your water bill has come through, for £160, for example, and now your zakat date has arrived and you've not paid that water bill, but it's due. Then you can deduct that from your zakatable assets. So the balance of interest in mortgage, we've discussed this. It's been a long one, we've not got time for that. When should I pay my zakat? So that was done. So we had step number 1, work out your zakatable assets. Step number 2, is there anything I can deduct? Do I have any liabilities that I can deduct? So, argument's sake, your zakatable assets are £20,000, liabilities are 6,000, so that leaves you with 14,000. You will pay 2.5% of that 14,000 as zakat. So when should you pay it? It should be paid after 1 lunar year has passed from the date the assets owned first equal to or were in excess of nisab. Mufti Sahib discussed this in detail. Now, as Mufti Sahib mentioned, in terms of business, if you've got a small business, it's sometimes easy to marry the dates with your personal zakat. But if someone's got a multi-million business, then it's difficult. Do you know, on the zakat date, then to request balance sheets and work everything out. So as Mufti Sahib, the Muftis have given in the AA, OIFI, etc. They've mentioned that then you can work out your zakat according to the lunar year, but then your percentage will be 2.577%, not 2.5%. So for example, every financial year, every April, you're going to get your balance sheets and stuff. You can just give your business zakat at that time, but because generally the solar year, it's longer than the lunar year, you will work it out with 2.577%, not just 2.5%, to marry and to obviously close the gap between the solar and lunar year. The zakat must be paid every year on this date. Fluctuation of wealth above and below the nisab will not be considered unless you go completely bankrupt. Then you will look at a new nisab. When should you pay zakat? When should I pay it? It's permissible to prepay zakat. Mufti discussed this. However, at the time of paying zakat, the intention should be explicitly be for future years. So if you're going to advance your zakat payment, you need to make the intention, do you know what, this is for advance. So my zakat date, which is coming in 3 months' time, I'm paying this for my advance zakat. Now, in terms of many a times, people want to pay their zakat within Ramadan or the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, because these are Mubarak days and nights, the blessed days and a blessed month. So either you can pay advance, so when your zakat date is in Dhul Qa'dah, so when Ramadan comes, you can start paying a bit in advance. But what you need to do and what you need to make sure you do is when your zakat date comes, you still need to do the calculation. So let's say within Ramadan, you pay £250 in zakat. Your zakat date comes in Dhul Qa'dah, you do your calculation, and your zakat now comes up to £260. So how much extra do you still need to pay? You still need to pay £10 in zakat. Because you paid £250 in advance. Let's say it came to £240, so you give £10 extra, Allah will reward you for that. But yeah, so you can still do that. Other option is that when your zakat date, let's say your zakat date is Sha'ban, and you want to give in Ramadan, when your zakat date comes, you calculate everything, you separate this zakat money, and with the intention, this is zakat money, make sure you inform everyone at home, so the wife doesn't use it for anything else. And then when Ramadan comes, you can then give that zakat out. So it is incorrect to delay or postpone payment of zakat after anniversary date to a future date without a valid reason. Outstanding zakat from previous years should be paid immediately. So if you've not been paying zakat, and this is why it's important that you have, as Mufti Sahib mentioned, that connection with your children. Because as soon as they become baligh, and if you've, like for example, child benefit, you've been putting it into their account, that's theirs now, and most likely they're going to have more than the nisab at the age of 13, 14, 15. So they need to then start paying zakat every year. But if you've not paid zakat for any years, you need to do as much as you can to work out how much it was and pay that immediately. So that's when who can you pay the zakat? So you've done the full calculation, your zakat is X amount. Now who can I give my zakat to? Who's liable for receiving my zakat? So the poor whose zakatable assets. So we should understand what that term means now. Zakatable assets are all those things that you have to give zakat on. And his surplus non-zakatable assets. Surplus, anything which is above his needs. So the house you're living in, it's classed as al-hawa'ijul as-saliyah. It's a need. Yeah? Your clothes are a need. The food that you have is a need, etc. So this won't pay. But anything extra which is not a need, for example, anything you've got properties which are on rent, but that'll be classed as house. Anything anything which is not your basic need, and you own. For example, you've got diamonds. You own some diamonds, or you own some precious material, precious metals. That's not part of your hawa'ij as-saliyah, and it's not a zakatable asset. You don't pay zakat on diamond or platinum, but it will be classed as a surplus non-zakatable asset. So to work out who you can give zakat to, their zakatable assets and their surplus non-zakatable assets can't be above the nisab. This is different to if zakat is compulsory upon you. To work out if zakat is compulsory upon you, you only look at the zakatable assets. If your zakatable assets are above the nisab, £300, you need to pay zakat. So it can be possible where an individual doesn't have to pay zakat, but he can't receive zakat as well. So it's not necessary where if an individual is not paying zakat, he's automatically liable for receiving zakat. That's not necessarily the case. It could be where someone doesn't have to pay zakat, but he can't receive zakat as well. For example, his zakatable assets are £50. So it's not above the nisab, he doesn't pay zakat. But he's got precious metal diamonds which are worth £10,000. So he can't receive zakat as well. Because his zakatable assets and non-zakatable assets are above the nisab. So if all added, they do not reach the value of nisab after again settling debts, etc., then he can receive your zakat payment. So who can I not give zakat to? So the first one, what we discussed, that whose zakatable assets are valued below the nisab, but his surplus assets are valued at or above the nisab, he won't give zakat, he can't receive it as well. You can't give zakat to a non-Muslim. You can give sadaqah, can't give zakat to a non-Muslim. You can't give zakat to a Hashimi, someone who's a direct lineage of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is mentioned in hadith. Yeah, so you can't give zakat to a minor child of a wealthy father, because a child who is minor, he will be classed in the ruling of his father. His father's wealthy, so he can't take zakat as well. You can't give your zakat to any of your ascendants or descendants. So your father, your grandfather, your great grandfather, mother, grandmother, you can't give zakat to them. Nor can you give the zakat to any of your direct descendants. So your children or your grandchildren, you can't give zakat to them. Yes, you can give zakat to other relatives. You can give zakat to your brother. You can give zakat to your cousins. In fact, they are more worthy of your zakat if they actually fall underneath those individuals who are liable to receive zakat. They are the first ones you should be giving your zakat to, because then you'll get two forms of reward: one for fulfilling your zakat, another one for sila rahmi, for keeping that family relations. You can't give zakat to construction of mosques, dalooms, hospitals, schools. The person you give zakat to, the condition is you need to make them the complete owner of the wealth. How many slides have we got left? So you have to make them complete owner of the wealth. So obviously you can't make the masjid the owner of it. You can't give it for burial expenses, or you can't give it for wages or remuneration in exchange. For example, your colleague or your employee is liable to receive zakat. You can't give your zakat money to him because you are benefiting from your own zakat there, because it's in lieu of a service that he has provided. So you can't benefit from your own zakat. For example, you can't give zakat to a poor person who's living next to you and just say, make sure you just send food to my house every day, because then you are benefiting from your own zakat, which is not permissible, because then the person you've given zakat to has not got complete ownership. You put a condition down. He can't do what he wants with that money. Ji. So we'll leave these calculations as well. What should I give? Who should I give my zakat? So it's preferable to pay to a close relative, as we mentioned, poor people residing locally or abroad, people who are in desperate emergency need, and students of knowledge. So if you're going to dispense your zakat through a third party, through a charity, etc., you need to ensure that you give it to a responsible and reputable organization. Check if there's zakat, the way they fulfill their zakat, have they got a Sharia advisor on board? Has he looked at everything, etc.? Is it according to the Sharia, etc.? What must I do when giving zakat? So you calculate. So this is now just a brief conclusion of everything. Number one, you calculate the amount you must pay by calculating your zakatable assets, minusing any liabilities. Then you'll have your total amount that you need to pay zakat on. You work out 2.5% of that. You make intention of giving zakat either when separating the money or when making the payment itself. Ensure the recipient is eligible. So you do what is in your in your capability and capacity to ensure that this person is eligible for zakat. When giving zakat, make the recipient the actual and complete owner. So we've discussed this. Of the assets given, hence zakat cannot be given to a general cause such as hospitals, road making, masjids, wells, etc. You may pay your zakat in either cash or kind. Someone's got a business, and he's got a food business where he manufactures, I don't know, rice, and he wants to give a portion of rice as zakat from his business, then that's permissible. So you can give zakat in kind as well. You can give zakat in kind, and it's not compulsory that you have to inform the recipient that this is zakat money, because it may be a means of degradation for them. So you don't have to tell them, oh, this is my zakat money. You just give them, and yeah, as long as you've made the intention clear that it's your zakat money. So final, you work out step number one, you work out all your zakatable assets. Step number two, do you have any deductible liabilities? That equals your zakat total. Then you work out 2.5% of that, and that's how much zakat you need to dispense.
We're going to take your question first. It's 32, the azans are around about 39. Muhammad Bhai, it's up to you whenever you want to call it. There's ladies that are passing questions up, written down, and if anybody here wants to ask questions, they'll ask. No questions? Clever people downstairs, mashallah. Well, alhamdulillah, we don't need to answer any of the questions. You guys get extra time. Hazrat, bismillah.
So I recently found out that, for example, if you pay your zakat,
Yep.
which is to, for example, Akal Kuwa in India, okay, and they have a charity registered in the UK. So if you're giving it to Ummah Welfare, it's okay because they get the gift aid and all that kind of stuff, and they would take the benefit of the gift aid. But if you've paid zakat to, say, Akal Kuwa, and then on your tax return, you show that as against your allowances. So you're basically getting a benefit back
Yep.
from the government. That's not permissible, correct?
Ask this to Mufti Faraz last year.
Yeah, you can take it, that's fine. I know.
So I actually asked this question to Mufti Faraz Sahab last year.
Okay.
So he goes, what's not permissible, I have in my notes, I've got the actually text, but he goes, what's not permissible is to take benefit from the direct beneficiary. So from the direct recipient of zakat, you can't take benefit from it. This is from a third party, so his answer was, then it's fine. It won't be that it's zakat. So if, for example, if you're going to class it as a donation on when you're doing your accounts, and hence then you won't need to pay tax on it, then it won't be classed as you are taking benefit from your zakat. Because it's what's not permissible, what Mufti Faraz answered was, what's not permissible is to take direct benefit from the recipient of zakat.
Which is fair, but technically speaking, if your zakat is, say, £5,000, okay, and I pay the £5,000, but basically what's going to happen is I may get back 20 or 40% or 45% of that benefit back. So I haven't paid the 5,000, but I'm actually getting a benefit of, say, £1,000 back. So have I really imparted all my zakat money that I'm supposed to pay?
No, if you're going to give 5,000 and then there'd be tax on that, so then you'd be taxed, let's say, £1,000. So in essence, you would have lost out, if I'm understanding this correctly, £6,000. But what's happened is that tax, you won't be taxed. So your zakat will still be 5,000, but that tax that you would have got, you would have you would have been taxed, that money that you would have been taxed, that won't come out. So your full 5,000 will still go in zakat. Does that make sense? Mufti Sahib will
It does, but I mean, I mean, maybe we haven't got time now, but I was in a serious conversation with somebody, and their firm belief is that you haven't given your full zakat because you paid 5,000, but you've got the benefit of 1,000 back.
And I was in the same boat. But that's why I asked Mufti Faraz. But this was Mufti Sahib's answer at that time. But because, again, I was in the same category. You were actually benefiting from your zakat in essence.
It's a good question, okay. The way I look at it, just to echo what Mawlana Sajjad Sahib has said, you have a limited company. You know your zakat is £5,000. Yes. You have paid that zakat £5,000, yes, through your limited company, and it's reached anyone, then that 5 grand, what was between you and Allah, has got to the people. Aapki zimmedari us waqt pe hogi. Yes, it's done. Yes. The question then is that you have put that down as an expense. So the way I see it, you're not really gaining a benefit in the respect of you're not gaining anything more. All you're doing is reducing your overall tax liability. You are actually saving yourself from something as opposed to gaining more. I'll give you another parable, another example. In our community, there may be certain people that they don't show certain earnings, okay, which is fine or they want to control their earnings. I don't want to use the term tax avoidance. I think what about tax efficiency? That's how we term it now, isn't it? Tax efficiency. Now, that might be legal, okay, which is fine, but if you are then going to use those low earnings to claim benefits, wo jaiz nahi hai. You get my point? Because then you've overstepped the mark. So I've given you that example. So in terms of paying your zakat, because look, reality is that the UK law does not differentiate between sadaqah, zakat, lillah. As far as you're concerned, it's a donation. When you go to the accountant, Ismail Bhai is going to put it down as a donation. So Bismillah, if you're earning, I wouldn't really call it a benefit, but if it's saving you from tax, then inshallah is no issue. Anything else? We've still got, I think they're happy to, we've still got a few minutes.
We've got a question in the comments. It says, if someone from back home doesn't have nisab, but has phones, laptops, etc., does this count under surplus wealth?
You're an expert. You're expert at this.
So, do you know what's classed as an essential need? That will change time to time and society to society. For example, many ulama have said that, for example, a phone now is classed as an essential need. Me and Mufti Sahib discussed this many a times. I strongly opine that if someone back home, for example, not phones, but let's say their zakatable assets are less than the nisab, and they have, for example, 3 50-inch TVs in their house, one downstairs, 2 in the bedrooms, which are worth £500 each, then personally, if they are struggling to get food, ideally, rather than because now I'd class that as a surplus thing. Are your 3 TVs actually from the Hawaij Saliyah? Are they actually essential needs? Now, obviously, there's television, there's monitors now. So if you're using your monitor as a computer for work, etc., that'd be an essential need. But if it's just to watch television or for recreational purposes and they're worth £1,500, then are they actually essential? If you're struggling for food, you could sell that and buy, feed your family. So then personally, I'd say that, they wouldn't be eligible for zakah. Others might disagree, but ideally it's that mindset that, okay, you're struggling for food or you're struggling to run the house, but then why do you need them 3 TVs in the house? Could you not sell 1, 2 of them and then, help pay for your food, pay for your bills, etc. Same case in the UK, you could say as well. But I'll let Mufti Sahib disagree if it.
No, I'm not going to change his answer. If they have a phone, it's fine. If they have a laptop, it's fine.
What about if the phone is extravagant? You can't get away with phones that are £150.
Yeah.
Literally the same thing except quality.
Yeah.
Somebody has £600.
Yeah.
Which happens in countries.
Nowadays people have 1,100 iPhones. They just want
Say
Well,
that.
I'm pretty far behind you.
Yeah, I think gently remind them. Gently remind them. Anything? Ji, Imran bhai?
So in a business, so when you value your stock at the selling price,
Yes.
and then
Mm.
you can deduct
At the
invoices.
market value, not the selling price,
Retail
unless
price.
yeah, yes,
Stock
retail price, yeah,
Retail
so,
price,
yep,
yeah.
yep.
And you deduct your,
Because you can sell it
deduct your-
for whatever you want. Yeah, you're saying yep.
and you can deduct your invoices. Yep.
If you've been levied for that
Suppliers,
invoice,
your suppliers, you
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
deduct that.
You probably somebody's billed you for them product,
and you've
yes,
not paid it yet.
and you haven't paid it. You can deduct that.
One of the slides said that you could deduct whatever you owe over 12 months. So does that include wages over the next 12 months?
Because again, it's in lieu of a service, isn't it?
But it could include
And
month's
that you've
wages.
not received that service yet.
But could it include that month's wages?
If
Yeah, you could include
No.
that month's wages, yes, because they've done the work. That money's outstanding, or the portion that's outstanding.
But if it's in lieu of a service, you can't.
No, he's saying that if what that month's wages, if you're working out your zakat and they've worked 3 weeks that
Yeah,
month, you can
yeah.
subtract that 3 weeks because you owe them that money, even though you may not formulated the wage slips.
Yeah, and you can knock off your tax bill because companies pay their tax bill like 9 months later,
Yes,
so you can knock off the tax bill.
you can ask your accountant, but yeah, you would obviously claim that as an expense, those
Not
wages.
someone working out how much zakat you should be paying.
What do you mean by knock off the tax bill?
So if the tax bill is £10,000,
Yeah.
so can you knock that off?
When would it be legally due? When you've got that tax bill, or is it legally due in 9 months' time? If it's legally due in 9 months' time, then you can't knock it off.
It's legally due as soon as your account ends, but you don't have to pay for 9 months.
So, yeah, so this is why Mufti Faraz has given that leeway of doing it financially, your businesses, and taking the 2.577%. Because if you do it with your personal, it can get really messy like this. But it will depend on when it's legally due. If it's legally due now, then yeah, you could deduct it. If it's only legally due in 9 months' time, yeah, then